The Backcount. I run nights at the High Pines Market off County 12, the kind of grocery where the roof leaks in 3 specific places that I've learned to ignore when it's not my aisle. The compressors out back sing a steady note that you either let into your head or fight all shift. I let it in. It's better than the drone of questions you can't answer. I stock produce first because it dies the fastest. You get a feel for what fruit will make a liar out of you and what will keep its promise. Apples behave. Bananas sell their future cheap. The hose at the misting rig kinks if you look at it like you doubt its usefulness. When the soft chime goes psst psst and the little fog, people stop to watch. Even at midnight, a person will watch mist the way a dog will watch a blackbird. Like air improved is worth their attention no matter what brought them here. Monday night isn't busy. The night shift is its own weather. You get truckers who want peanut butter crackers and a carton of milk and a person to speak a sentence at. You get third shift nurses whose carts hold carrots, tonic water, a very particular cereal always the same, and you get a guy in a reflective vest who parks by the cart corral and sleeps with one eye open until his break goes back to being work, and he returns the cart he's been guarding. We get the boy who sprints down aisle 6 to the end cap with energy drinks and then sprints back with 2, like someone will blow a whistle on him. He pays exact change and stares at my name tag like it is his job to memorize what to call a person. He is the only one of the after midnight regulars who sometimes uses my name. Miles, he says, because it's right there. They got the new flavor yet? Not until Friday, I say. They missed our route. I point at the cardboard with last week's date. He nods like we are conspirators. He is 13, maybe 14 if I give him the benefit of a summer. His face has learned what a man's face will be later and tries it on and takes it off when he remembers where he is. I run the front end when Jean takes her break. She does 4 to midnight and then I get the register while she goes out to her car to make calls. She calls one number and speaks into the phone with her head bent like she doesn't want the words to see her mouth, and then she calls another and doesn't say anything at all in between the yeses and ahas. When she comes back in, her face has both grief and competence on it. We are a good team because neither of us asks questions we don't have time to meet the answers of. The night that the clock started counting backward, I was facing cereal. Pacing is where you pull every box to the edge, like you're giving it a chance. I keep the rows straight without looking, because my hands are good at polite jobs. It was late enough that the radio DJ on 97.1 had settled into that voice where he loves everything, his tones syruped at the edges. The humming of the lights sounded tired, more tired than I felt. I stood up from my crouch and stretched, and the spine pops went up the aisle, and then died, listening to themselves. I don't wear a watch. I have a phone like everyone else, but I leave it in the back because I work better when my hands don't have to ask permission. At the end of the aisle, there is a wall clock above the end cap with the tortilla chips. The clock is one of those that never looks straight because the nail hole in the back is bigger than its purpose. I glanced up at it to see if I'd timed the break right. It said 1:43. Not the world's strangest number if you're on nights. I faced a run of Raisin Bran, nothing fancy. I pulled, tugged, tapped, lined. I looked up again because moving your eyes somewhere a clock lives makes you feel like time is a thing to interact with. It said 1:42. I did the quick math a tired man does. Did I misread the first one? Did it already change and I was slow to catch it? Then it dropped again. 1:41. If that had been it, one odd tick, my head would have kept the aisle's peace. It kept going. 1:40 arrived like a person stepping through a revolving door with the practice of someone who's done it 1,000 times. The second hand, a red stripe thinner than a stick of gum, was doing its usual trot. Only it was going the other way, smooth as if it had been built to. I stood underneath it and did the thing I tell other people not to do, put my hands on a thing I didn't want to buy. I took the clock down and held it. It was warm in the way plastic gets when it's been under light longer than it planned on. I peered at the back like maybe there'd be a manufacturer S note that read, "Sometimes." The battery cover, a cheap slip of black, had a piece of tape on it where someone had lost the tab. The tape's end had lint and a hair in it, not mine. I pulled the tape away and the little cover fell. The AA battery inside was a generic brand we sell. I popped it out. The second hand kept up its smooth reverse. The numbers slid, 139 to 138, while the battery sat in a line across my palm. "Okay," I said, because the mouth wants to pretend it can file paperwork. Clicks and whirs carried from the dairy case. The compressor answered the question it always opts to hear. Outside, a semi came off County 12 and took the turn too fast with an empty trailer. Loud bang-bangs as the box skipped. You can tell an empty truck by the way it sounds like a brag. A customer in boots took a short lap, as men in boots do when they came in intending to buy nothing and needed the proof that they weren't tempted. I put the battery back and the clock obligingly kept doing what it wanted. By then it was hunting 1:30. My chest had that empty fullness where breath forgets the plan. I turned the clock face toward my shirt like I could smother a thing designed to be admired from a distance. It didn't change the doing. "Miles," Jean called from over at the lottery machine. "I got a line for scratch-offs. You want to flirt with others besides cereal?" "Be there," I said, and the clock in my hand felt the weight it always had, and a weight I didn't know how to name. I hung it back up, and 90 seconds later it very properly said 1:28. The scanner at register 2 beeped like it had been told to. The beeps make a person feel at home, even if home is not what it should be. People put things on the belt and I pulled them toward me. A ring of onions, a bottle of ginger ale, a dozen eggs for an old man who held them like someone had told him eggs want to be treated as if you remember they were creatures. The barcodes did their quiet work. A cat food client from 2 rental blocks over bought 12 tins and had me double bagged like she thinks plastic is armor. I watched the little lane numbers bump, the receipt printed with that sound of a new roll, fat and generous. When I tore it, the paper kept its teeth. The old man said thank you like we'd exchanged something worth considering. The ginger ale lady said nothing, and that was good enough. "Your clock's drunk," Jean said when she slipped back in. "It said 10 minutes ago that it was 10 minutes ago." She sold a merry money to a man from the gas company who scratched the corners like he could force the result toward him by working an angle. "My daughter says the whole internet is weird," she said. "Not exactly the scientific term." "It will be nice when science returns," I said, and we both smiled without teeth. At 2, after the 2 AM beers had moved through the self-checks without making a fuss, I took the trash back to the compactor. The compactor sits beside a wall with a notice board where the owner likes to tape things like "There S no I in team" and an outdated flyer for the town S 4th of July picnic. The board has a way of losing its staples that I blame on no one and love anyway. The compactor shoves. It makes a whine like a thin man acting tough. I hit the button. The ram came down and then rose and then went middling and then lowered like a distracted tractor. When I looked up from the safety grill, the time clock on the wall above the employee hand-washing poster said 1:15. I swore, friendly-like. The time clock had never liked me, but it always had the decency to be too fast, not creative. I went to the break room because that's where we pretend the world deserves a chair. Our break room is a table with an apology layered over it in rings. The microwave is newer than it looks because grease turns white plastic beige in this light. The soda machine that no one fills anymore still stands because it looks like care. On the far table, the television that the owner bought at auction years ago sits on a stand with a sticker that reads Lot 36. We only turn it on when there is a storm coming, and we want to see the weather radar remind us how small our town is as a green and yellow smear approaches. The screen was dark, and then the screen wasn't. Nobody had hit the power. The picture came in sideways, if a rectangle could be so confused. A news anchor stared at something off camera with a face that had been told to be sympathetic and brief. His mouth moved. His words arrived like an old record, slower than the lips suggested. Then they backfilled themselves to match. I watched his eyes. They had learned how to follow a prompter. He lifted his eyes to the lens, like a man peeking in a window he's not supposed to look through. The crawl at the bottom read a sentence I have never liked. Officials advise. It didn't finish the sentence before moving the other way, then pausing, then pulling back. The anchor's smile arrived before he had decided to react. When the crawl finished its loop backward, the words made a kind of sense. Officials advised patience as public clocks and devices adjust. Residents were urged to limit time-critical tasks overnight and to avoid making major irreversible decisions until morning. No cause had been identified. Science was mentioned and then was not. If you listened long enough, you heard both apology and a cousin to the word anomaly. Someone had done the work of making a statement that would frustrate a person who needed a statement and calm a person who hadn't had an excuse yet and needed one. By the melon display, the girl who bottles juice during days put up a hand-painted sign last week with the price and a little drawing of a glass with ice cubes that looks like it was made by somebody who never actually drinks juice. The sign had a smudge in the corner where somebody tried to wipe a fly away and caught the marker. I love that smudge because it insists on a body having been there. When I came back out front, the sign was clean. The smudge had either removed itself or been corrected across time by someone with perfect hands. I felt the petulance of a boy and then the embarrassment of a man who feels things for a smudge. At 3, the clock above the chip said 12:55. I went outside. I made it look like I was collecting carts because that is what I tell myself is the job when the inside is too close to my throat. The air had the cold you get in spring when weather lies. The parking lot has 3 lights. The one closest to County 12 flickers on a 2-second loop like a laugh you done to participate in. The other 2 were steady. The highway beyond it held nothing visible and everything important. Engines make their worship without asking permission. The sky to the east, which at this hour in April should be thinking about lighter shades, decided against it. The darkness deepened, not the way a storm warns you ahead of a rush. This was the opposite of a rush. It was huge patience. The sound of the compressors by the dairy door warmed a degree, then remembered their job and went back. There is a thing you do when a room shifts in ways that don't fit the routine you've trained your bones on. I went to the cooler. I listened. The compressor did its steady work and then breathed in reverse, not the fan's direction, but the way the motor hummed. Harmonics stacked backward, like notes unsung. I held my hand to the coil and felt the pull stronger a second and then easing. I could have called someone. I could have called Dennis, the owner, and told him his utility bills were going to have an argument with themselves this month. I could have called my sister, which is what you do when your mouth is uncertain and your mind thinks the problem can be solved by someone who remembers the name of your 5th grade teacher. I didn't call anyone. The thing that was happening wasn't a phone kind. We had 3 customers that last hour. The boy with the 2 energy drinks returned because boys believe the rules of time are for someone else, which is a kind of pre-hope I miss. A woman in an orange shirt that said custodial across the back in letters that had done time in a laundry took a bottle of multi-surface cleaner and pads and a candy bar with a peanut tan wrapper, and she didn't look like she was allowed to be seen buying candy. I put it at the bottom of the bag and gave her a nod. I felt like respect. The third was a man who buys dog food in the same size bag every Tuesday because his dog is disciplined and he is too. He paid cash, which always feels like a classroom where the teacher has assigned handouts and you want to raise your hand to ask whether noticing the principal new hair counts as extra credit. The bills on the register display swapped themselves out during the sale, denominations trading places politely. I took the money anyway. At 4, Jean put her sweater on like someone wrapping a baby. "You staying?" she asked me, as if a person who stocks cereal had options. "You want me to call Dennis and tell him his clocks are drunk?" "I'll call when I finish dairy," I said, though the idea of finishing anything belonged to an older world. "Get home before morning reheats itself." "Tell it to," she said, smiling, "the kind you earn." She pushed open the doors, and the doors took an extra inch to close, and the handle's metal let go of her hand with reluctance, like a smart child left at a sitter who has nice toys and a functional sense of humor. She crossed the lot with the gait of a woman who knows how to navigate both ice and men. After she left, the cells of the store noticed their own pressing. The light said a low, ash white, the way the sun gives up on making itself felt through beige curtains. The aisles went silent on top. All the noises were below the waist, the scrubber still drying in the corner, the little creaks from plastic as it leans into being product. The printer in the office burped one sheet of paper with 3 lines of numbers that suggested a thought and then ate it back into itself. I have a routine when I feel hounded. I take a rolling ladder and climb it and sit 3 rungs from the top where I'm not supposed to. I pretend I'm case counting. I look down the aisles and let the store's geometry talk. For all the clutter and brand names, the store is simple. It is a box. It is a series of parallel lines. It is a place where time is meant to pass without comment. Nobody comes to the grocery to experience a moment. We want the opposite. We want the before and after of it. The moment itself is where we grab the milk and feel both nothing and everything and check out and hit the automatic doors with our hip and already be thinking of the sink. My phone in my back pocket shoved itself against me like a pet with a reminder. I took it out. The lock screen had no time, no date, just that photograph of my nephew from last summer, face sticky with peach, a boy who runs like he's returning something. I swiped and it unlocked like it always does, only the icons had slid themselves into a row that had no pride in itself. The text from the county sat there with the same language the TV had tried out and failed to make friendly. Maintenance, devices, displays, patience. People on the group thread for shift workers had written things like "Welp" and "My oven is 1984" and "God bless," and then the thread rolled back 2 comments and became quiet again. I don't know what to tell you, I thought. My mind went a little straight line. I thought about milk dates and whether the store time would let them become wrong or right. I thought about receipts and whether they would print numbers on them, and if they didn't, how Dennis would file taxes when the tax office already calls Dennis by his first name, like they across the table from each other for dinner every night. I thought about the broken bag tie we keep by the bulk rice and tape together every week, and whether it would repair itself if we left it alone. I thought about my face. There's a mirror in the office, cheap, leaned against the wall. The kind of mirror stores buy to help their employees feel like they are people with hair. I went back and looked into it the way a man looks into a thing he is using for an argument. The lines across my forehead had softened. The little white crescent scar under my left eye from when a screwdriver slipped and I decided to finish the job anyway had faded to a memory discoloration. My mouth had unlearned a single habit, and I couldn't tell you which. I didn't look younger. Young isn't just skin. I looked like a man who had never done some things, which is an insult I should have learned to ignore and still can't. I ran my hand over my jaw, felt the stubble not scratch as much as it should. I hated the world for an instant, the way men do when it gives them something they once wanted at the wrong time. I pressed my finger to the mirror until the pad went white. The skin on the other side did the same, which is a funny way to think, I know. It felt like leaving a message for someone who was tired of messages. I finished dairy. I faced the yogurt, which is whole human behavior in cups. People like regularity. They also reward themselves in low-stakes ways. You can go a month eating the one with the blue label and then punish yourself with the one with the green label because it uses the word plain like a dare. At 5:30, if I'm allowed to call it that, the county sent a louder thing. It came as a disruption in the radio between songs, the DJ giving way to the voice of a person from town hall whose job is to sound organized. "Boil your water if you feel unsafe," the voice said. "Stay off the roads if the lights don't behave in ways you're used to. Let your kids sleep." I smiled at that one, even though it didn't belong to the same paragraph as lights and safety. "Let your kids sleep" feels like advice offered by a mother to strangers. The voice added something I didn't know I needed. It is all right to be quiet. Whether or not science can explain what you are experiencing tonight, we will be here when the sun decides to cooperate. It was that last line, "We will be here." It landed. It didn't matter if it was a lie. It made the room less cruel. I turned the vacancy sign off, which is to say I pushed the little rocker button on the power strip behind the front register, so the light behind the blue letters had fewer excuses. The sign dimmed, and then the wires inside decided something else, and it brightened, and then it went out. Because sometimes even electricity respects a man who used his thumb with intention. The store calmed its box shape for a breath. I stood in the middle of the entry mats and listened to the automatic doors as they tried to correct themselves every few minutes, and then gave up. The rubber floor pieces by the cart corral had an indentation that said someone had stood there more than they had to. I knew it was mine before I decided I did. 6, 7, I don't know. Time went back and needed adjustment, so it adjusted my sense of it first. The flips and skips slowed. The second hand on the chip clock gave up pretending and sat at 6, and then spun once, not too quick, just cocky, and then decided it didn't owe anyone the courtesy of flush. The boy with the energy drinks didn't come back. That meant his body had decided to sleep, or someone had reasserted the idea of bedtime. Good. The woman in the orange custodial shirt didn't walk back. The man with dog food could live 2 days on stories of discipline. Jean texted that she had stopped at the river and watched it move in the wrong direction for a minute, and then become normal because the river is married and knows it has to stay. And she had cried, and she didn't know why. I texted back a heart and the words, "It's allowed," and then regretted the heart, because I am unpracticed at the obvious. The sun made a decision. You could feel it more than see it first. The east lightened, slowly, this time the right way, and the birds got themselves together for the call and response they practiced because somebody got to say something mornings. The store took on that unwanted grey that makes cases look like factory floor and men look like they have lived all the days they have. The registers updated themselves to show sale prices on cans of soup no one buys until real winter, and the price went down 1 penny and then another, and then I watched it and it went back to what it was when we tagged the shelf 2 weeks ago and called the job done. The first day person arrived early, which is the only thing that makes me trust them. Miles? That was the voice of my boss's boss, a manager named Britt, who wears patience like it has sleeves that sometimes pinch. She stood in the doorway to the break room because she doesn't like coming onto the floor without armor. "You see everything?" "Enough," I said. "The clock's practicing tricks." "County says it's an equipment thing," she said. "Like an adjustment. I don't know what that means. They want us to keep receipts, even if the times don't make sense. They want any customers who get too upset to be given a number to call to leave a message so they can talk to a person later. Do we have coffee?" "We have coffee," I said. "We always have coffee. The pot grudges time but does the work." I poured her a cup and poured mine, and we stood with our cups like two people at a funeral for someone both of us liked and neither of us loved. "If we aren't supposed to make major decisions," she said, setting her cup down, "we might as well inventory the cheese." She smiled. The mouth is a powerful tool, and hers had learned to use itself for calming, but you could see where the smile tested it. By mid-morning, the store was full of regular brightness, cursed by it. The sunlight through the front windows lit the cart handles like the day was proud of plastic. People began to come. You could tell the ones who hadn't noticed a difference. They had a lightness that didn't show in their hands. You could tell the ones who had looked at their ovens and their phones and the clock above their sink. They had a new respect for the child in them who asks to be told a story in a voice that does not betray how frightened the reader is. You could also tell the ones who had slept through it and would learn about it from colleagues later. They were the happiest because ignorance had offered them a cell and they stepped into it gladly. I did not begrudge them. The boy with the energy drinks came in at 11. He was slower. He took one blue, one yellow. He looked at me longer than usual and shook his head once like he'd been asked. He lifted his chin toward the clock above the chips, and I nodded to save the work. I slept the day. When I woke, the light out of the blind slats looked like a photograph I would have mistaken for mine if you showed it to me 2 years ago. I ran my hand over the hair at the back of my neck because I had a dream in which someone stood behind me and checked the temperature of my grief. I took a shower, and the water made the pipes complain the way they always do, only quieter, like they had remembered we can do nothing about it. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, my cap, with the High Pines Market name embroidered cheap and earnest. And I went back to the store like you go back to a place you both dread and love, because it gives you what nothing else does, even if that thing is only the weight of the floor. Tuesday night, the numbers did it again. They didn't announce themselves. The difference began in the beeps. The scanner, which has a pitch I could hum, went a touch lower, and then to a pitch I would call memory, if a beep could hold dawn. The freezer, which throws its click into a person's shoulder, delayed. The overheads, which hum like fluorescent sick bees, found a frequency the store didn't enjoy and let us all know. The seconds on the chip clock did their neat slide up and then down and then mostly down. The digital on the end of aisle 9, the one we keep around in case someone wants to argue about whether the sale ends at midnight or midnight, showed 23:03 in green and then 23:02 and then 23:01. Which is an ugly way to think of time in a grocery store where night often holds for a while before it agrees to day. Jean had come in on her off because she said she didn't like the idea of me counting backward alone. She wore her sweater like a sibling you don't talk about in front of company. We stood at the donut case because sugar at night makes sense in ways that would offend me if I had taken more care of myself. She said, when I was little, my dad used to set the kitchen clock 5 minutes fast, so we'd be on time to church. He'd say, my time is 5 minutes better than your time. It annoyed me so bad, I don't think I forgave him until I was 30 and he was gone, and I realized he had created a version of 5 minutes for us that we lived by even if it was fake. I was mad because you don't want to learn one time for the house and one time for the town. I nodded. The donut case had its own light that made things look better than they were. A pair of crullers looked exactly like the kind of choices I'm tired of making. Who would you forgive? I asked, because I wanted to understand the precise edges of her complaint. For doing a bigger version of that? No one, she said, and we both laughed because it felt braver than it was. At some point, a boy, maybe not the energy drink boy, stood outside the automatic door and watched it open and close 3 times with his face set like he was testing whether he was allowed to be. Then he turned and disappeared into the pause where the real night lives. A woman with 2 jars of baby food, apple sweet potato like a dare, held them in her left hand like she'd forgotten how much was allowed to fit there. She paid in ones. She said, "It's still this week, right?" And it was the kindest thing anyone asked me that night, because it shows you care about the shape of your life, but not in a way that treats the world like an insult. I knew I was in trouble at the freezer aisle. The glass reflected me, tinny. My face exaggerated into a scowl I wasn't wearing, then eased back into my ordinary complicated. The line between my eyes made a choice and softened and then didn't return, the way an apology doesn't give your day back. My father, S-mouth, sad and stubborn, had a little less of him in it when I met myself in the glass. I pressed my finger against the door to feel the cold and left a print on the inside. I have done this 100 times to annoy myself into cleaning it later. The print evaporated like a lie. I smiled at that, bitter and private, and some of the lines at my eyes softened again and then slid toward a shape I didn't recognize from any age I've ever held. That's when the clock above the freezer, the one that only the store managers are supposed to look at to set overnight temps according to corporate, went to 20 whoos with a smirk, and then 1959, and then 1958, as if we were all in the kind of building where they count to launch. There was no launch. There was a parallel world with less of me in it. I said my name out loud. You would think it's the kind of act that helps. It's not. It's like trying to clear a fog from inside a car by breathing on the window. You can't out-humidity a cloud. Miles, I said, and I made it sound like an introduction to a person for the first time, not a turning of a key. I said, the street I grew up on. I said out loud the names of 2 friends who moved away because I was a coward about leaving. I named the basketball court we played at and the smell of the dirt there after men, with no idea how to do lawn work, tried to fix the cracks by force. I said the name of the only dog I owned with anyone, and the way the dog's ribs showed when he got too old for stairs, and I pretended not to mind sleeping downstairs on the couch, which was the only honorable part of that year. I tried to anchor myself, and I realized I had become the thing in the house you anchor to, and it wasn't to what you call reliable. At 2, if we still had 2s, I saw the first absence I couldn't reason away. It was aisle 4, the place we keep pasta and sauce and canned tomatoes. If you've spent your life in small towns, you know which aisle that is. People come to it at least 3 nights a week to solve problems that would ruin them if we called them by their names. I turned into the aisle and the middle 5 feet had no light. You might say a ballast went. It wasn't that. The dark wasn't dark. It had shape. The cans that should have been stacked 3 deep didn't throw back any of the light from the ends. The way, at night, even a dark thing will do when you give it a fair shot. My eyes did the work. They widened the way they're supposed to when you want more. The middle foot between 2 stacks gave me back a soft grey, like a person who has already forgiven you. I stuck my hand out. The hand looked more like a hand than I wanted it to. It had fewer nicks, a different knuckle scar story. The air had that nothing to grip we tell kids about in the language we prefer, when we don't want to admit the world can end. The light at the end of the aisle flickered and corrected like someone not wanting you to notice the scratchiness of their throat. I filled that foot with boxes. I did it because I am a person and people fill space with objects. It worked. The boxes sat there, definitely. The dark with shape moved a foot to the left like a phantom, ending up in film because someone knocked their elbow against the tripod during exposure. I shut my eyes and felt the blush of my own blood, and then I pushed a hand truck more into the center, and the dark pushed around the hand truck like it had friends I was not invited to meet. You ask yourself things you will not tell anyone afterward. With my eyes closed like that, I wondered if this happened to everyone or if it was a me thing. I thought of calling my sister. I thought of taking a picture. I worried that when I looked at the picture, it would be of an aisle the way anyone would see it, and not the way it was. I thought of going home and lying on my floor and waiting for the minute to become a time I could imagine. I put the cart back straight and went to the front of the store because motion is one thing we learn in jobs like these, and I wanted a problem I recognized. "Carl, you all right?" A man in a steel mill hoodie had come in and stood by the lottery machine and stared at it like a dog waiting on someone to say a syllable he knows. He wasn't Carl. He was someone with the shape of Carl. I'd put a name on him, and it slid off him like oil. He looked at me like our mothers had overseen a play date. "Third shift ending," he said. "You ever get home and realize no time at home happened?" I said yes, because Wednesday had learned its intent. "Saw the river going wrong," he said. "Thought about calling someone. Didn't know who we call for river opinions." "County," I said, because that is the number that stands in for emergencies that aren't allowed to be emergencies. They have a line for advice. They have a line for advice, he repeated, and smiled with very little humor. The lottery machine made a sound like a bird trying to pull a worm out of a sidewalk, an ugly little tuggy thing, and then spit out a long strip of void lettering that looked like a prayer rug if you are the kind of person who sees geometry when you stand close to paper. We both watched it settle. Probably we should just go to bed, he said. He didn't laugh. He didn't buy a ticket. He left. He made the bell ding without apologizing to it, which is something I try to be better than. There is a moment in a week like that where you feel the thing that is happening has learned not to prove itself anymore. Tuesday passed into something else, and Wednesday had a shape that belonged to people who aren't me. The county put out a notice on their page, which got turned into a printed flyer at the credit union and taped to the door at the laundromat. Please refrain from time-sensitive activities. We appreciate your calm. Please report critical issues via the published channels. I read it, and like a lot of men, I grilled one half of a sentence longer than I needed to, then stopped. I put the paper in my pocket. It said the only thing a person can say in a grocery: please be gentle with equipment. Wednesday night, Jean stayed home. She texted me a picture of her kitchen clock and the sourdough loaf she had thrown in the oven when alarms were switching to mute. The clock read something that meant nothing, and the bread had the color that happens when heat remembers itself. She's better at life where it meets food than I am. I ate pasta with butter in the break room on a paper plate and drank soda out of a bottle too big for one person and felt nothing about it. The clock ran down differently, not slower, sharper, maybe. The numbers slid with intention. 13 hour, 12:59, 12:58, until they didn't want me paying attention, and they got shy about it. I watched the store's compound eyes. The little green safe light cast a square reflection on a shelf that, when I looked closer, was from the wrong side. The exit sign over the back door that has a chirp in it from a failing something chirped its little idiocy, and then unchirped it, and then stayed quiet, not because it was fixed, but because it had been asked to not be annoying. The door to the back alley swung inward half an inch, and then back, and then stood closed with that smugness doors have when they know you are weak for the idea they shut. The coins in my pocket settled more toward the front as if gravity had canted, and then settled back because the man carrying them has only one way he is comfortable standing. 2 in the morning, if we're doing that, tired, carried fatigue like 2 kids piggybacking. I pulled a pallet of bottled water and set up an end cap in front for the folks who wanted something they could control. They would buy the bottles because it's what you do when the water isn't doing what you asked of it. Buying the bottles doesn't fix anything, but bodies crave pushes against a world that has its own spite. The bottles shone like teeth. I cut my finger opening the shrink wrap, a little pull on the back of the knuckle where you don't have any extra. I put a Band-Aid on from the first aid kit that Dennis keeps stocked to keep OSHA bored. When I pulled my hand away, there was no blood on the paper backing. The Band-Aid worked backward for a second, as if I had not cut myself. The cut didn't immediately heal. That would have been a neat story. It didn't show until a beat later. Then it was, but shallower. Then shallower again, then there, then less there, like the world couldn't decide whose job it was to carry the pain. I stared at my hand and told it was okay, in the tone you use for a child who wants to cry but also wants to be respected. The hand behaved. The river did whatever the river did. I couldn't see it from the front of the store, and I find that my life improves when I don't go hunting for neighbors. The radio DJ kept loving everything. The commercials seemed to end in the middle of themselves, then restart, then be shorter. I decided that things that want to sell me something least deserve my compassion. A car idled outside for a long time with a person inside. I could see the red of the tail lights through the front glass, low and constant. They left at some point, and then 5 minutes earlier, which is the kind of sentence that makes you want to crack your neck. On the shelf by Register 3, we keep the kinds of magazines people pretend not to buy. Crosswords, large print, Find Your Personality with Pancakes, a glossy about the local outdoors with a trout on the cover that makes me think of the one that got away from a life where I had a good father. The magazines have months printed with authority. May, June. They chatted to each other in their rack, their spines taking a polite bow under fluorescent. At around 3, 2 of them stopped being. I don't mean they vanished. The stack was there was weight, there was a photograph on the cover that claimed to be of a place. The word May fell off into your head without putting its weight on your tongue. I stood completely still and watched my own body not register language. It is a bad feeling, and I recommend it to no one. I ripped the covers off. I don't know why. I had to do something, and that something was small and mean. The inside was pages and not words. The pictures remained. The advertisements leaned toward colors. The back page with an ad for a medication leaned and then forgot what its letters were doing. I took one back into the break room and sat with it like a person lied to by his own temper. I watched a picture of a smiling family become an arranged arrangement of mouth shapes, and then an arranged arrangement of chin and neck and shirt. I put the magazine down. I poured myself coffee and added powdered creamer because the half and half in the cooler has been promised to the dairyman, and I refuse on principle to steal from another routine. I drank the coffee, and it tasted like last night, the part before you make your mouth a liar, and then it grew shallower, and then it tasted like the first day I worked here, which was burned and good. I saw myself again by accident. The freezer door gave me back a man with less trouble. That is the awful part. I do not respond to the idea of a man with less trouble with envy. I respond with grief. The lines a face earns a currency. To be relieved of them without being relieved of their cause is an insult. The man in the door looked like he hasn't yet needed the sentence I sit on at work when the old guys come through and want a piece of my time. I know enough to help a little, but not to help a lot. My mouth shaped that sentence, and the man on the glass didn't appear familiar saying it. I bared teeth at him like I was asking to be held accountable. Around 4, that old blue hour I used to love when I drove home from other kinds of jobs, the store clicked. You know the clicks. There are little clicks when sensors decide to give up for the day. There are clicks when the heat chooses to become something else. There are clicks when a sign gives a last-ditch come-on for the hungry person driving past who promised himself he skip sugar this week. The clicks came in a little run, then they unclicked themselves, lightly, a gentlemanly undoing. The automatic doors opened and stayed for a beat, and then closed, and the sound they made remembered to be polite. The beeps at the register took a breath. The clock's second hand stopped caring. The number on the chip aisle went to 10, 0. It held there like an athlete at a practice trying to hear the coach. It slid 9:59, 9:58. It wasn't fast. It had no need to hurry. What would it mean to have privacy, I thought, at an hour like this? What would it mean to watch a thing run out that wasn't attached to you? A woman came in flustered with a paper that she asked me to fill out because the town hall had given it to her when she said her basement had been doing something, and they used the word reverse flow event, like they thought naming a thing makes it like men. She wrote her name, she wrote the description, she wrote time of occurrence, and looked up at me like I should help. I said, "You can leave it blank." She smiled and said, "I was trained to never leave anything blank." And I said, "The county has other problems." And she laughed because we love it when we get to be a person who belongs to a county. She filled it with now. That is the right answer sometimes. When the number went to 5, I don't know how I knew, but I knew it was not the same 5 anyone else in town was seeing. The light seemed to stand a little closer to things on the left than on the right. The hum took on a new vowel behind a familiar consonant. The weight of the bag of onions on the scale read pounds, and then the same pounds with a decimal obviously placed in a different part of the line of numbers. I put my hand on the onions because they do not allow room for liars. The weight corrected to the first story. The store had braces. It had moved back. I did not call Dennis that morning. I did not call my sister. I did not call anyone. I stood in the cold of the freezer aisle and thought of a man in a motel off an unpleasant highway counting backward to his quiet, and I felt the small understandings animals must feel when the wrong scent moves across their field. We all are counted, sure, but you have to pick what you ride to get to your number. The night ended, or the clock reached its end, which aren't the same, and the day came in a way that felt like abundance, forced through a sieve. People arrived with their habits and raised a hand in half thanks for their own survival, which they had earned by simply not being asked to do more. The county posted a new notice. Operations continue. Expect intermittent anomalies. Avoid unnecessary. They avoided the word decisions this time and used activities again because all words are contagious. People stood in the canned tomato aisle and thought about sensations, not meals. The boy in the reflective vest stood by the cart corral and watched the automatic door like he wanted us to ring the bell for him. I gave him a nod he could use on someone else later. That evening, I sat on my couch and listened to the refrigerator and the neighbor upstairs and the distant trains, and thought I might be okay until this morning, when I woke and saw myself in the window for the first time during daylight, and my face had given itself, yet again. I looked better in a way that made me worse. The lines had been arranged in a different order. The fatigue, which always sits in the middle of the face if you're honest, had moved up and out like it had been scraped with a large knife. The stress that you carry in your mouth corners, the kind collected by years answering politely to people who half-score you, had been wiped. I looked like a man who could have made choices and didn't. It scared me for a minute in the way new appliances used to scare me when I figured out how much of the old ones I had burned into muscle. I went to work early, and I did not like what I was going to do. I stood by the chip clock and watched it practice. The numbers were in the double digits. They slid backward like a child doing a dance he learned from television in a room where you aren't supposed to run. They were going to go to 0, which is a word that shouldn't belong to groceries. The automatic doors opened for me, and I went outside with the rolling ladder and set it under the clock. I climbed. Britt came in and tilted her head like I was taking liberties with management. I reached up and took the clock down. It was our clock, yes, but it was also the town's time told wrong in a plastic face. I took it in the office. I put it in the back in the cabinet where we keep returns. We don't know how to process. I closed the cabinet and the plastic clicked, as if to mock me with the small power it had left. When I went back to the aisle, the spot where the clock had been had a nicer color of paint behind it that made the rest of the wall look tired. The digital on aisle 9 kept doing its job. It would count back to whatever it needed to, and then it would do what it was told when we plugged it back into the wall after this was over, and the county had written that this event was concluded. The freezers will warm and cool and repair and leak, and we will quote parts, and we will get the parts late, and we will 3/4 fix them, and the aisles will be faced, and the beeps will return to correct pitch, and customers will say, "I appreciate you," in a tone that both offends and satisfies the part of me that doesn't want gratefulness, only fair. One more thing happened that changed the temperature of my thinking. A man who I see twice a week came through the line with 6 items, which is a man who hopes he is not a burden. He is 60 if you are judging by the first number on the page, and 50 if you are judging by how he carries questions, and 75 if you are counting the dose he has to talk himself into taking every morning. He put bread and mayonnaise and bologna on the belt and looked at the fluorescent lights like he had known they would be what illuminated him. He got out his wallet. The wallet was a folded leather thing that is the only companion some men in this town have had longer than their trucks. He flipped it open and looked, and the content had fewer stories in it. Business cards, receipts that had lost their ink, driver's license with no expiration printed, only his picture. His face on the license looked like that version of him who is allowed to smile while he holds his breath. He closed the wallet and opened it again, and I watched a miniature version of what happened in my mirror happen under his thumbs. Some cards were now not yet stuck in there. Some receipts had crisp corners. He breathed out. He looked at me and his face said, "I will take whatever kindness you have on you right now." I scanned the bread and the bologna and the mayonnaise and I said, "It's on me," and I meant the store. And the register adopted my lie like a pet. He said, "All right," in a voice that made me not hate myself. He took the bag. He left. The bell did the ding like it believes in itself. The last night it ran down without the courtesy of drama. The green number at the end of 9 went from 08 go to 0759 to 0758. And when it reached 01 goes, you could feel something in the store shift, like a patient S-heart making counting easier for the nurse. The overheads hummed quieter. The air bashed itself around less. It realized it had been set right a little. Outside, the highway kept assigning its thunder to the tires that had come in for it. The river took its time. The sign at the laundromat asked again for the public to use machines, only if necessary, which made me think of a man deciding whether to wash his shirts for a job that might not be there because time had taken up the habit of going arrogant. Jeanne showed up at 10. She did not need to be there. She brought me coffee in a mug that belongs to her house and a pastry that I did not deserve, and a story about her ex-husband that made us give the cups 1 second of air between them so we could not shrug ourselves apart. Britt stood by the little spinner with the hot dogs, the one that makes me feel complicated feelings about who we think we are, and asked me if I thought it would end at 0 or stick itself on an invented number. I said what I think the store needed from me. The only thing I know about 0 is that it makes people admit things about what they liked before they learn to be embarrassed. She laughed, which is a thing that made me feel 2 inches taller, and then she went in the back to talk on the phone to someone who thinks corporate can sound like a pastor. We hit 0010. The number looked like it wanted to be helpful. "Should I be doing anything?" Jeanne asked. She tried to make it sound like banter and didn't bother to finish the job. "We will have customers who want to return the days," I said. "We can take exchanges only." She blew air hard enough to move a hair and then put it back. The boy with the energy drinks came in with his head in his shoulders and walked right to the chicken case and bought 1 sad cold wing in a paper box with a price on a little orange sticker that we had put on. The last time days were sober, and he paid me with a handful of nickels, and I gave him change and used his name because he is the only teenager born in this county with a name from the Old Testament who made me feel like names are templates, not burdens. He stood there while the number went draw 6, draw 5, and he said, "Is it bad if I want to see it?" And I said, "It's normal." And he nodded like a man and left so that it could be my problem, not his. The last 4 seconds were not seconds. The green looked pretty. The store had a calm that did not belong to its kind. The carts sat patient in their stall. The produce had been misted an hour too early, or too late exactly, and every leaf had a bead on it, like sweat in a locker room after an apology. The beeps, I will say their name one more time because I miss them when they have to be quiet, were silent. The hydraulic hinge on the back door sounded smart. I stood in front of the 9. Jean stood by me, and Britt came out and joined us with her arms folded, because that's how managers pray. The number dropped 0.03, 0.02. And in that second, where the world likes a good reveal, my reflection in the glass of the freezer door decided it was going to oblige me one more thing. My face had smoothed, and then unsmoothed, and then smoothed across 3 nights, like someone learning a skill they will never need. It chose right then to give back more of me. Not all. Enough. The dish under my eyes went away, then came back at the corner because truth refuses to leave as quickly as lies. The crease between my brows reformed the way a road going back to gravel does. No one does it for you. It decides itself. The mouth came back into the shape it has become in conversations with people who want eggs at midnight, and men who buy dog food quietly, and women who need me to nod while they put baby food on the belt. The jaw stubble, which had annoyed me because it looked like a man S, when I have never much felt like one used and abused as the word demands, announced itself. The little crescent white under my eye, particular to a time when a screwdriver taught me what tension does when it sets a trap, said hello again. Almost imperceptible, like something I feel, and you'd only notice if you were going to kiss me. Udrozozo1, the number said. The calm reached up from the floor like a loyal animal. Zogzuzu, it said. The green went to nothing. It didn't boom. It didn't go black like a theater. It simply stopped needing to be looked at. The overheads kept humming. The fridge kept its bargain. The heater blew one ribbon of air that moved the plastic strip by the butcher counter. The county didn't call and declare a return to normal operations because they've learned that promise is a thing without handles. The town had men who went to work without becoming ceremonies. People were who they were. We had no receipt for the end of it. We were, in a way that irritated me and comforted me, stuck with ourselves. I stood there longer than the register can forgive. Then I went and counted cash I didn't need to count, as if I believe I give money its dignity in a way institutions do not. Britt walked back to the break room without words, which I liked her for. Jean poured another cup of the coffee that taught me how far love can take a substance and said, "You look like you." And I said, as any man would when the compliment fits badly, "Do I ever?" And we made our eyes do that thing that keeps us from saying something about the better-looking lie that took a walk. There is not a neat ending to this. That night I did not go home. I went to the river to see whether it had demanded to be called he again because of its behavior. And it looked like the river looks when a barge has moved through and left its professional behind. Two kids stood on the bank with rods they had no intention of being good at. A man with a dog that looked like a laundry basket had tied his leash around his wrist like a wedding ring and stared at a point upstream that we could not see. The dog sniffed and was pleased by his own breath. The traffic light at County 12 and Ridge changed in a sequence that no one could fight about. The clock in the diner, where the cooks throw eggs like tokens, had a hand that looked like it could stand to be loosened. The air had the smell of soap resolved, of hose water lived in, of old concrete remembering to be a simpler thing. I went back to the store and faced cereal because life does not allow a pause for men like me to decide to have a moment. People came because they always do, and I offered them bags, and they took what they asked for, and then more that they didn't tea. I sat on the rolling ladder 3 rungs up and looked down the aisles that pretend to be parallels and felt the store own the floor. I sighed, and it sounded like a man learning to live with what his hands can fix. For a week the mirror chose me. The face I met was the old argument. Some days it smoothed more than I like and I stared it down. Some days it wrinkled only in its good places and I forgave it. The cut on my hand closed in a day, and then in a day, and then I remembered to respect what bodies do. The magazines kept their covers, and I didn't rip any more because I had no right. Jan went back to 4 to midnight and took her calls like clothespins in her pocket, and we stood at the donut case some nights and talked about the certainty in ways that made me realize I am allowed to talk about my respects like they are not pronouns. At the end of the month, the owner printed a sign that said, "Thank you for your patience during recent disruption." He taped it at the front on the glass, and it leaned to the left because he put tape under the right to compensate, and the tape let go, as tape does under heat. I straightened it once, and then let the lean remind me it is a thing made by hands. I suppose I could make a story for you that states the bigger thing. Say that clocks betrayed us, and we met our reflections, and those reflections made demands, and the numbers ran us to a final number to remind us we will be asked to be sums. That's not what it felt like. It felt like a store not letting me keep lying to myself about whether I carry weight. The boy with the energy drinks grew a mustache that made him look like he is on the verge of yelling, and never will. The man with the dog food skipped a week and then bought 2 bags with a wordless energy that breaks me if I let it. I ring them up like if I'm gentle it will matter. The flyer at the laundromat is still taped to the glass. Someone wrote in the corner with a ballpoint pen, "Okay now," and drew a little face with a straight mouth. And then the ink faded and the letters became lines, and then became impressed in the paper only, and then remained exactly that, which is enough. Some mornings on my way in, I stop at the big front window that faces the lot and the highway, and I touch my finger to the glass and leave 5 ovals that I will have to clean later because we have a standard. I look at my reflection and count the lines and then do not count because that makes them behave wrong. I let my face be. I let the clock above the chips hang crooked because that is honest about the nail. I hear the compressors click and I welcome the correction. I stack pairs left to right, soft to hard, the way the day asked me to on my first week, and has never had the energy to draw up differently. I listen to the hum and make it sing the song it always sings when we are ready. We are open, we will be here, we are small, and that matters. If this story lands with you, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys quiet, literary horror. Comments are open. Tell me your favorite image or line.